first day on the job, alone in the dark. And already, I wished I hadn't come. I was 28, living alone in a quiet corner of northern Arkansas, after losing the job that had been my anchor for years. That position was the very reason I had moved here in the first place, so losing it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted next. For a while I just drifted, applying to whatever work I could scrape together. A few weeks later I landed a gig at a run-down roadside inn just outside the small town of Jasper. A couple of days of shadowing the night clerk later, I found myself sitting alone behind the front desk for my first full night shift. The inn was nothing fancy, a faded two-story building tucked off the state highway. Past the streetlights, there was nothing but dark fields, and an abandoned diner sat next door, its windows cracked and dusty. The early hours of my shift were uneventful. A handful of travelers drifted in, checked in quickly, then disappeared to their rooms. Most of them were just weary, the kind of people who smelled like long drives and motel air fresheners. But one guest caught my attention. She seemed exhausted, but there was something else. Her movements were sharp, hurried, and she kept glancing nervously over her shoulder. I didn't have more than a minute's interaction with her before she vanished down the hall, key in hand. After that, the lobby fell completely silent. I sank into the chair behind the desk, staring through the glass doors at the empty highway. Not a single car rolled past for what felt like hours. I assumed the night would crawl along at a glacial pace, until the bell over the door jingled. A man stepped inside. I hadn't seen a car pull in, so I assumed he was another guest from earlier, maybe one who had checked in before my shift. But the way he paused in front of the counter, looking at me with a strange intensity, made it clear that wasn't the case. "How much for a room?" he asked, his eyes flicking repeatedly to something behind me. I told him we had rooms available, and asked if he wanted to check in. He hesitated, his gaze sliding past me again. Finally, he shook his head and walked out without another word. Curious, I glanced over my shoulder, trying to figure out what had held his attention. The only thing back there was the old key wall, a series of cubbyholes, each holding a brass key for one of the rooms. I called it the key wall because, well, that's exactly what it was. I kept my eyes on the door as he left, waiting to see a car pull away, but nothing came. That struck me as odd. There was no plausible way he had walked here. The nearest open spot, just a gas station on the highway, was nearly 10 miles away. After a moment, I stood and peered out the glass. The lot was empty except for the few cars of the guests already inside. No sign of the man anywhere. I shook it off, returned to the desk, and settled in for the long, quiet stretch of the night. The owner hadn't given me much to do beyond checking guests in and out, so I leaned back in the squeaky chair and tried to make myself comfortable. About 30 minutes later, the shrill ring of the landline made me jump. I grabbed the receiver. A woman's voice came through, trembling and urgent. She said someone was standing outside her door, and no matter what she did, he wasn't leaving. I jumped to my feet and ran outside, my shoes crunching on the gravel lot, but whoever had been there was gone. My heart was still hammering as I hurried toward the far end of the building, where the woman's room was. When she opened the door, her face was pale, her hands clutching the blanket around her like a shield. I asked her if she knew the man or if he had said anything, and she shook her head so fast it nearly made her hair whip around her face. He hadn't spoken at all, she said. She'd seen him hovering outside her window, and when she told him to leave, he just stood there. She'd called me only because she didn't know what else to do. As she described him, a chill ran down my spine. The way she talked about his lanky frame, the cold, lifeless look in his eyes, I knew immediately it was the same man from earlier, the one who had wandered in asking about a room. I asked if she wanted me to call the police, but she was insistent. She didn't want anyone involved. She was leaving in the morning anyway, and all she wanted was for me to be aware, to watch if he came back. Reluctantly, I nodded and went back to the lobby. The next couple of hours crawled by as I tried to make sense of it all. What was he doing here? Why had he been standing outside her door? Maybe he was drunk. But no, I hadn't gotten that impression earlier when he walked in. There was something else to it, something colder. Then, in the dead quiet of the night, a sudden crash ripped through the motel. The sound of furniture tipping over, thuds echoing off the walls. I sprinted toward the source, adrenaline spiking. Her door at the end of the hall was wide open, and through the doorway I saw her, pressed into a corner, shaking, and the man standing directly in front of her, blocking any escape. I shouted something, God only knows what, but he turned instantly, his gaze locking on me. His face was flushed with fury, his eyes bloodshot and unblinking. I froze for a second, terror clawing up my chest. Then he lunged toward me. I stumbled back, but he ran straight past, moving unnervingly fast. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as he bolted across the parking lot and vanished into the dark tree line beyond the highway. I rushed to her side, checking she was unharmed. She was, thankfully. My hands were still shaking as I ran back to the office and dialed 911. The operator listened in disbelief as I explained, and I learned something chilling. After standing outside her door, he had circled the building and slipped into the lobby while I was checking on her, swiping a spare room key from the wall. And then came the final, unexpected twist. She hadn't told me the whole story. That man was her ex-husband. She had been hiding from him, staying at the motel to get away from his unpredictable, violent episodes. Her insistence that I not call the police? That had been a lie, a desperate hope that he would simply leave without complications. That night left its mark. I couldn't shake the images, couldn't stop thinking about how close it had come to turning into something worse. What if he hadn't fled? What would he have done? The uncertainty haunted me long after the adrenaline faded. I stayed on at the motel for a few months after that, though the air was always thick with unease. Night after night, dealing with people who made me question the normal boundaries of fear, I finally left when I could. Even now, I can't stop thinking about that night, the way it felt like the dark had pressed in just a little too close. It's a memory that lingers, not just because of what happened, but because of how easily it could have been worse.
Subscribe and I'll tell you another story the next time you're alone in the dark.